The wind came down off the eastern rim of the Rocky Mountains, the way it had come down for 10,000 winters. Cold, patient, carrying snow. Below the ridge, a single cabin held against the dark. One stone chimney, one thread of smoke rising straight into a sky that had forgotten the sun. Inside that cabin, a fire burned low in a stone hearth. A woman knelt by an open trunk. Her fingers moved across something old, something silver, a grandmother's comb, carved in the shape of a folded songbird. She turned it over in the firelight, and on the underside of the handle, where her thumb had passed 1,000 times, without seeing, she felt 6 small dots, arranged in cells. She read them again. She stopped breathing. The dots spelled a name she had never heard. And somewhere in the lower valley, far below the storm, 30 riders were lighting their lanterns. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Verity Whitfield knew this because Tuesdays were the days she taught the Henderson twins their morning lessons. Both boys were blind from birth. Both boys hated the cold. And on that particular Tuesday in late October of 1878, the cold had come early to Philadelphia. She sat on the wooden bench in the schoolroom at the Pennsylvania Institution for the Instruction of the Blind. Her fingers rested on a sheet of embossed paper, 6 dots arranged in cells. The new system, the French system, brought over only a few years before and still considered experimental by half the teachers in the building. Verity loved it. She loved the way her students' fingers moved across the page like small, careful animals. She loved the silence of reading. She loved that her father had once told her, when she was 9 years old and crying, because she could not understand the world, that the world did not have to be seen to be known. Her father had been dead 12 years. She did not think of him every day anymore. Only on Tuesdays, only when the children were still and the radiator hissed and the smell of coal smoke pressed against the windows. The headmistress knocked once and entered without waiting. "Miss Whitfield, a letter from a law office in Boston." Verity took the envelope. Heavy paper, wax seal, a name embossed on the back. Cromwell Eaton and Pierce Attorneys at Law. Her hands began to shake. She did not open the letter at the school. She walked the 11 blocks to her boarding house, with the envelope pressed against her ribs beneath her coat. The wind cut through Market Street like something with teeth. A boy selling chestnuts called out a price. She did not hear him. In her room she sat on the edge of the narrow bed. She broke the seal. The letter was 3 pages long. The first page was a formal notification. The second page was an explanation. The third page was something she had not expected. Her father had written it. 12 years ago, the week before he died, she read the first paragraph twice, then 3 times. Then she set the page down on her lap and pressed both hands over her mouth. He had not died from a fall. The lawyer's letter explained that her father had instructed his firm to hold this letter for exactly 12 years. 12 years from his death was the point at which she would be considered fully of legal majority under Pennsylvania law, free of any remaining guardianship, claim her uncle Colonel Thaddeus Hale might invoke. But the letter had a condition. She must travel to a place called Silver Creek Pass in the Colorado Rockies. She must find a man named Silas Beaumont. She must say to him the words her father had written on the 3rd page. Only then would the lawyer release the documents that proved what had happened. Verity read the 3rd page. "Tell him I have not forgotten the winter of '63. Tell him the silver comb came home." She did not understand any of it. She understood only one thing. Her father had been murdered. The next morning, She walked to the Western Union office on Chestnut Street and sent a telegram to her uncle in Denver. The telegram said she had received an offer of marriage from a settler in Colorado. The telegram said she had accepted. The telegram asked for her uncle's blessing. She had no settler. She had no offer. She had nothing but a name on a letter and an instruction from a dead man. But she knew her uncle. Colonel Thaddeus Hale would never let his ward travel west alone. He would arrange everything. He would choose the man. He would pay the dowry. He would believe he was sending her to a controlled marriage with someone he could watch. He would not know that the moment she stepped off the train in Colorado, she would disappear into the mountains to find Silas Beaumont herself. Within 10 days, her uncle had written back. A match had been made. A man named Silas Beaumont of Silver Creek Pass had agreed to marry her in exchange for a modest dowry. The arrangement had been brokered by a Reverend Caldwell of the same town. Travel would be paid for. A coach would meet her at the station. Verity sat very still when she read this, because the name was correct. Because somewhere in the Colorado Rockies, a man named Silas Beaumont had agreed to marry a woman he had never met in a town where her uncle had a chosen broker, on a timeline her uncle had approved. Something was already in motion. She did not know what. She packed one trunk. Inside the trunk, she placed 3 dresses, 2 pairs of stockings, a Bible. Her mother had given her the silver comb that had belonged to her grandmother, and that her father had once carried away on a journey to the west and brought back without explanation. She placed a small leather case containing 6 books in raised dot print. She placed the lawyer's letter, wrapped in oilcloth at the very bottom. She closed the lid. She left Philadelphia on the 3rd of November. The train took 8 days. She arrived in Silver Creek on the 11th. Silver Creek was not a town. It was a wound in the side of a mountain, a scatter of board buildings along a single muddy road that froze and thawed and froze again, a trading post, a livery, a small white church, a boarding house with a sign that had lost half its letters. And around all of it, rising in 3 directions, the Rocky Mountains. Verity had never seen mountains before. She had read about them. She had touched maps of them, raised relief maps with peaks she could feel beneath her fingertips. But the maps had not prepared her. The maps had not told her about the way the air thinned, the way the cold reached into a person's bones, not from the outside but from somewhere deeper. The way silence, in a mountain town, was not the absence of sound, but a presence. She stepped down from the coach. A man was waiting. He was tall, but not as tall as she had imagined a mountain man would be. He was perhaps 6 feet. He wore a long oilskin coat, a wide hat, a beard that was not unkempt but was not trimmed either. His eyes were the color of weak coffee, his hands at his sides. Behind him stood another man, older, soft around the middle, wearing a black coat and a clerical collar, smiling. The man in the clerical collar stepped forward first. "Miss Whitfield, I am Reverend Caldwell. Welcome to Silver Creek." Verity nodded. She did not extend her hand. The Reverend's smile widened just slightly, as if he had noticed her hesitation, as if he was filing it away. "This is Silas Beaumont, your intended." Silas Beaumont did not smile. He did not bow. He looked at her for exactly 2 seconds. Then he turned and walked toward the wagon and a pair of mules. "My apologies," the Reverend said softly. "He is a man of few words." Verity watched Silas's back. She thought, "So that is the man my father trusted." The wagon ride out of Silver Creek took 4 hours. Silas did not speak for the first 3. He drove. She sat beside him. The road climbed the burr. The trees changed from low pines to tall spruces. The air grew thinner. The cold grew worse. She had wrapped herself in 2 shawls and a wool blanket, and still the cold found her. In the 3rd hour, Silas slowed the mules. He stopped them at a place where the road bent around an outcropping of red stone. Below them, very far below, the lights of Silver Creek had become small as embers. Above them, very far above the first stars, had begun to appear. He turned to her. "I did not write the letters." Verity blinked. "I do not know what you mean." "The letters that brought you here. The ones to your uncle. The ones that arranged this. Reverend Caldwell." "No. Before Caldwell. The letters about a settler willing to take a city wife. The original notices in the Eastern papers." "Then who?" "My brother Levi." She was silent. Silas looked out at the descending light over the canyon. "My brother is 32 years old. He has not seen a woman who was not his sister or his mother in many years now. He took it into his head 2 years ago that the family needed a wife. He wrote the notices, he paid the placements, he answered the letters. You did not know. I knew he was writing to someone. I did not know it had gone this far." "Then why? Then why am I sitting here?" "Yes." He did not answer for a long moment. He looked at her. "Because when the wire came back from Denver, when your uncle named you, I asked Levi to show me everything he had written, and there was a letter in his stack that I did not write, that he did not write." Verity went very still. "What letter?" "A letter from a law firm in Boston, dated 2 years ago, addressed to whichever Beaumont was reading, saying that a young woman would one day need to come to us, saying her name." The cold moved through Verity like a hand. What was the name? Verity Whitfield, the daughter of Edmund Whitfield, who passed in Boston in 1866. She closed her eyes. The mountain did not move. The wagon did not move. The mules shifted their weight, and one of them blew a long breath of steam into the air. "You came," she said. "I came because my brother insisted. I came because the law firm letter said that if you arrived in Silver Creek, I was to bring you to our cabin and keep you there until you spoke a particular phrase." "What phrase?" He looked at her. His coffee-colored eyes were not warm. They were not cold. They were waiting. "The silver comb came home." Verity put her hand against her chest. Her father's words. From the page she had read in a Philadelphia boarding house. From the page she had told no living person about. "I have not forgotten the winter of '63, she said softly. Silas Beaumont closed his eyes for one breath. When he opened them, something in his face had changed. Not warmth, not yet, but recognition. "Then you are who you say you are, and we have work to do." He shook the reins. The mules began to walk. The cabin came into view at dusk. It sat in a fold of land below the eastern rim of a long canyon. A natural crook in the rock face wrapped around the northern side like a cupped hand. Smoke rose from a single stone chimney. A barn stood 20 yards from the house. 2 horses watched from a corral. A dog barked once and then went silent at a low whistle from Silas. The door opened. 2 men stood in the doorway. The first was tall and broad and angry. Verity could feel the anger from 20 feet away. It came off him like heat off a stove. He had Silas's coffee-colored eyes, but his face was harder, more closed. Garrett was 38, 6 years younger than Silas and 6 older than Levi. The second was smaller, younger. He had sandy hair that fell across his forehead. He had a book in one hand, and when he saw her, his entire face flushed red, and then white, and then red again. "Brothers," Silas said, "this is Miss Verity Whitfield, of Philadelphia. Levi, you owe her a word." Levi stepped forward. He could not look at her. "I am sorry." His voice cracked. "I am sorry I lied. I am sorry I wrote the letters under your name. I am sorry you came here under a false promise. I did not. I did not know who you really were. I only knew the law firm had said someone would come who needed protection, and I—" He stopped. He looked at his boots. "I am Levi. I am the young'un. I am very glad you are here, and I am very sorry." Verity studied him. He was perhaps an inch taller than she was. He could not be a danger to anyone. His hands were the hands of a man who had spent more time with paper than with rope. "What did the law firm say?" she asked. Levi raised his eyes. "They said her father once helped a man in our family. They said when the time came for her to leave the East, we would be the only place she could be safe. They said her uncle would try to find her wherever she went. They said we should hold her here until she spoke certain words. And the words. The silver comb came home." Verity drew in a long breath. The angry brother spoke for the first time. "Inside, the cold will get into her bones." His voice was rough but not unkind. "This is Garrett," Silas said, "our middle brother. He does not trust strangers. He will, eventually." Garrett did not respond to this. He turned and went into the cabin. The cabin was warmer than Verity had expected. A large fire burned in a stone fireplace. Skins lay across the floor. A long table dominated one half of the room. 2 rifles hung above the door. A doorway in the back led to what she guessed were sleeping quarters. The smell was wood smoke and tallow and something sharper. Pine pitch. She had read about pine pitch but never smelled it. Levi took her trunk and carried it to the corner. Silas closed the door against the cold. Garrett stood by the fire with his back to her. For a long moment no one spoke. Then Verity said, "My father wrote to your family 15 years ago. He helped someone." "Who?" Silas looked at Garrett. Garrett did not turn around. "Not yet," Silas said softly. "Not yet what?" "Not yet for that story. Tonight you eat. You sleep. You wash if you want. The cabin is yours. The back room is yours. We sleep out here. Tomorrow we begin to talk." "About what?" "About why your uncle is sending word into these mountains looking for you already." She froze. "He cannot know I am here. I told him I would write from Silver Creek tomorrow." Silas finally allowed something like a smile to touch the corner of his mouth. "Miss Whitfield, he has known you were on the train from the day you boarded. Reverend Caldwell sent him a wire from Silver Creek 6 days ago. Your uncle has had 6 days to plan. Whatever is coming is already coming." She sat down very suddenly on a bench by the fire. Levi brought her a tin cup of something hot. She did not ask what it was. She drank. The first storm came on the 3rd night. Verity heard it before she saw it. A long, low sound moving along the ridge above the cabin. Then a slap of wind against the wooden walls. Then snow, not falling exactly, driven, sideways, white and gray and white again. She stood at the small window in the back room and watched the world disappear. By morning the pass would be closed. By morning she would be locked in this cabin with 3 men she had known for 3 days, no way to send word east, and an uncle in Denver who had 6 days of planning behind him. She should have been afraid. She found that she was not. She was something else, something she did not yet have a word for. A kind of stillness. The same stillness she had felt the first time she had pressed her fingers into a page of raised dots and understood that the dots were words and the words were a voice she could hear without ears. She turned from the window. She crossed to her trunk. She knelt beside it. She lifted out the dresses and the stockings and the Bible. She lifted out the leather case of Braille books. At the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, lay the lawyer's letter. She unwrapped it. She read her father's words again. Tell him I have not forgotten the winter of '63. Tell him the silver comb came home. She set the letter aside. She lifted the silver comb from the small velvet pouch where she kept it. It was old, heavier than it looked. The handle was carved in the shape of a songbird with its wings folded. Her grandmother had owned it. Her father had carried it west once and brought it home with a story he never finished. Verity had used it her whole life without knowing what it meant. She turned it over. On the underside of the handle, where she had run her fingers 1,000 times, she felt something she had never noticed before. 6 dots, arranged in cells. She read them. She read them again. She stopped breathing. The dots spelled a name. Nasha. Verity sat on the floor of the back room for a long time. The wind moved against the walls. The fire in the main room burned low. She did not move until Silas knocked once at the door and said her name softly through the wood. She opened the door. He held a folded blanket. He saw her face. He stepped inside. What is it? She held out the comb. She showed him the underside of the handle. She watched his face change. He took the comb very carefully. He turned it in the firelight. That is Braille, she said. That is the French raised dot system. My father knew it. He learned it for me. When I went to the school, he used to leave me notes in it before. It says Nasha. Yes. Silas stood very still. He closed his hand around the comb. Then your father carried this further than you know, and the winter of '63 was not a phrase he chose at random. Who is Nasha? He looked at her. His eyes had gone somewhere very far away. She is a woman who lives in a camp on the eastern rim of this canyon. She is the daughter of a man your father once saved. She is. I think she is the reason you and I are both standing in this room. Take me to her. I cannot. Not yet. The storm will hold 3 more days. The passes will be closed. And there is something I have to show you first. What? He looked at the comb. He looked at her. Levi did not write the first letter. She frowned. He said he wrote the letters to my uncle. He wrote the ones to your uncle. He did not write the one your father's law firm answered. Then who? Silas drew a long breath. I did. She stared at him. 12 years ago, he said, when I came up into these mountains. I came because I had lost a wife and a son to fever in St. Louis. I came because I could not be in a town anymore. I came up here and built this cabin, and I meant to die alone in it. Yes. 3 weeks after I arrived, an Apache woman came up the canyon. Alone. She was carrying a silver comb, she said. She said an Eastern man named Edmund Whitfield had given it to her father when she was 13 years old. She said her father was dead. She said her people were being hunted by an army colonel who wanted their land. She said the Eastern man had told her father that if she ever needed help, she should send word east through a law firm in Boston, and that the help would come. My father. Your father. He had been here years before. He had been part of a survey crew that found a band of Apache hiding from a militia. He had carried 2 children to safety on his own horse. He had given Nasha the silver comb so she would remember him. Verity could not speak. I wrote a letter that night to the Boston firm, 12 years ago. The firm wrote back. They said your father had died only weeks before. They said the matter was no longer in his hands, but they kept a record of the correspondence. They kept a record of 3 Beaumont brothers in a cabin in the Colorado Rockies who had said they would help if help was ever needed. And 2 years ago, the firm wrote to Levi, saying a young woman would come. The wind howled outside. The fire snapped. Verity sat down on the edge of the bed. She put her face in her hands. "My uncle," she said. "My uncle Thaddeus Hale. He is the colonel. He is the man who was hunting Nasha's father." Silas did not answer. He did not need to. The storm lasted 4 days. Verity learned the cabin in those 4 days the way a blind student learns a new room, slowly, with her hands. She learned where the kettle hung. She learned which floorboards creaked. She learned that Garrett would not speak to her unless she spoke first. She learned that Levi could not look at her without his face going red. She learned that Silas Beaumont was a man who said exactly one true thing and then waited for you to ask the next true thing yourself. She also learned to read the brothers. Levi was the writer of the family. He had taught himself letters from a Bible their mother had carried west. He owned 6 books, and he knew them by heart. He told Verity on the second night that he had written the letters because Silas had been alone too long, and he was afraid his oldest brother was dying by inches in a cabin with no woman in it. He had not meant to do harm. He had not known the law firm letter would lead to her. Garrett was the silence. He hunted. He skinned. He sat at the table and stared at the fire and answered questions only when they were asked twice. On the 3rd evening, Verity asked him outright why he hated her. Garrett did not look up from the leather strap he was oiling. "I do not hate you. You will not speak to me. I do not trust your name. Whitfield. Hale." She paused. "I am not Hale. Your uncle is. Your blood is. And your uncle is the reason I spent 2 years in a federal prison for a robbery I did not commit. He needed a body to hang, and he chose mine. The Apache pulled me off a transport wagon. That is the only reason I'm sitting in this chair tonight." The fire popped. Garrett finally looked at her. "I do not hate you, Miss Whitfield. I hate the man whose name you carry on your mother's side, and I am asking you to forgive a man who has not yet learned how to separate the two." Verity studied him for a long moment. She said, "My father hated him also. I am beginning to understand why." Garrett nodded once. He went back to his leather strap. Something in the room had shifted. On the morning of the 5th day, the snow stopped. Verity stepped out onto the porch in a wool coat that Levi had loaned her. The world was white and silver and silent. The canyon below the cabin had become a long bowl of unbroken snow. The smoke from the cabin chimney rose straight up into a sky that had finally gone blue. Silas stood by the corral. He was looking east. She walked to him. "What?" He pointed. Above the eastern rim of the canyon, very faint, very thin, a column of smoke rose into the cold air. It was not the smoke of a cabin. It was too thin, too tentative. The smoke of a fire that someone is keeping very small because they do not have much fuel and they do not want to attract attention. The Apache camp, he said. Nasha, and nearly 60 other souls by his count. The big hunting parties went south after the elk this year. The early freeze pushed everything down out of the high country before they could finish their winter stores. They have been burning thin since October. They are going to lose people, if this cold holds. Verity looked at the thin smoke. She thought of a 13-year-old girl receiving a silver comb from an Eastern stranger 15 years ago. She thought of her father. She thought of the words on the back of the comb that she had touched 1,000 times without knowing they were words. She thought of what kind of person her father had been. "Take meat to them," she said. Silas turned. "What? You have meat. You have been hunting since I arrived. The smokehouse is full. I have seen it. Take meat to them. Miss Whitfield, take it tonight, tomorrow, before the next storm. You do not know what you are asking." A white man riding into an Apache camp with a wagon of meat is not a simple thing. It is the simplest thing in the world. They are hungry. You have food. Silas was still for a long time. He looked at the smoke. He looked at her. Garrett will not agree. Then we will go without him. I am going with you. Miss Whitfield. I have a silver comb that says her name. I am the only person in this cabin who has a reason she cannot refuse. Silas studied her. She did not know what he was looking for in her face. Whatever it was, he found it. He nodded once. "Tomorrow, at dawn, 2 mules, 1 horse, 4 deer if I can fill the pack by tonight. You ride behind me. You do not speak unless I tell you to speak. You do not show the comb until I tell you to show the comb. Are we agreed?" "Agreed." She turned to go back inside. He stopped her. "Miss Whitfield." "Yes, your father. He would be very proud." She did not trust herself to answer. She went back into the cabin. That afternoon she sat at the long table with Levi. He had his books out. He was showing her a page of poetry from a small volume that had belonged to their mother. The light from the small window fell across the wood in long pale stripes. A sound came from the road. Hoofbeats. A single horse, moving fast. Garrett was on his feet before Verity registered what she had heard. He had a rifle in his hands. He moved to the door and stood beside it without opening it. Silas came in from the back room. The hoofbeats stopped in the yard. A voice called out, "Silas, Silas Beaumont. It is Tobias Pell." Silas opened the door. A young man stood there. He could not have been more than 22. His hat was crusted with frost. His horse was foam-flecked and blowing. His face was raw with cold. He saw Verity past Silas's shoulder. His eyes widened. Then he remembered why he had come. "There is a column moving up from the valley. United States Army. 30 men under Colonel Thaddeus Hale. They are looking for the camp on the eastern rim. They are saying the camp hit a supply wagon 4 days ago. Simcott at the trading post sent me. Said you would want to know. Said there is talk you might be involved." Silas went very still. "Pell. When?" "Tomorrow morning. They will be at the canyon mouth by mid-morning." Verity stood up from the table. The book of poetry slid from her lap to the floor. Tobias Pell looked at her again. "Ma'am." She walked to the door. "The Colonel," she said. "Thaddeus Hale, of Denver." "Yes, ma'am." She put her hand against the door frame to steady herself. "He is not coming for the Apache. He is coming for me." Behind her, Garrett lowered the rifle. Behind her, Levi made a small sound. Behind her, Silas Beaumont looked at her and said one word in a voice she had not heard him use before. "How?" She turned. "My uncle did not arrange my marriage, he arranged my death. He thinks I'm alone in a cabin with 3 strange men in the middle of a closing winter pass. He thinks no one in Philadelphia or Boston will ever ask hard questions about a girl who went west to marry a stranger and was never seen again. He thinks he has 6 days of planning. He thinks the storm closed the passes behind me. He is wrong on only one thing. Which? He does not know I came here looking for him." The fire snapped in the hearth. The wind began to rise again outside. Tobias Pell stood in the doorway with his hat in his hand and the cold pouring in around him. Silas Beaumont looked at Verity Whitfield. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Pell, ride back to the trading post. Tell Simcott that Verity Whitfield is in this cabin. Tell him she is alive and she is well and she is the lawful heir of Edmund Whitfield of Boston. Tell him to send a federal wire to a man named Marshall Jeremiah Cole in Denver. Tell him to use my name. Tell him the wire must go out tonight before the column reaches the canyon mouth. Can you do that?" Tobias swallowed. "I can." "Then ride." The young man was gone before Verity could thank him. Silas closed the door. He turned to his brothers. Garrett was already moving, pulling boxes from under the bench, counting cartridges. Levi was very white, but his jaw was set. "Tomorrow," Silas said, "we do 2 things at once. We ride to the Apache camp at dawn with the meat. We tell Del Shay what is coming down the valley. And we tell him that Verity Whitfield is the daughter of the man who once carried a silver comb up this canyon." "And the column," Garrett said. Silas looked at Verity. "The column we will meet on our own ground, with evidence, with a federal marshal on the wire, and with a woman who can speak her uncle's name in front of his own men." Verity drew in a breath. She felt the cold in her bones. She felt the silver comb in the pocket of her dress. She felt her father, 12 years gone, somehow standing just behind her shoulder. She said, "At dawn." Silas nodded. The fire burned in the hearth. Outside, the second storm of the winter began to move down the canyon, dragging the cold ahead of it like a slow hand. And somewhere in the lower valley, 30 riders were lighting their lanterns and saddling their horses, and beginning a march that would bring them to the canyon mouth by mid-morning of the next day. In a cabin above them, 4 people sat at a long wooden table. They did not yet know how the story would end. But for the first time in 12 years, the wind moving down the eastern slope of the Rocky Mountains carried the sound of a name no one had spoken aloud since the winter of '63. Edmund Whitfield. And it carried a second name. Quieter, newer, spoken only inside the head of a young woman who had come west with one trunk and one secret and one promise from a dead father. Verity. The story had begun. Dawn did not come gently. It came the way grief comes. Slow, cold, without permission. Verity stood at the window of the back room and watched the sky over the canyon shift from black to gray to a pale-washed silver that promised nothing. The second storm had passed in the night. The cabin had not been buried. But the world outside was a different world than the one she had walked into 4 days ago. She heard Silas in the main room, moving softly, loading. She turned from the window. She had slept perhaps an hour. Her dress was the dark gray wool one. Her grandmother's silver comb was wound into her hair at the crown. The lawyer's letter was folded inside the bodice of her dress against her ribs where she could feel it with every breath. She opened the door. Silas looked up. He had 2 rifles laid across the table. He had a leather satchel. He had a folded oilcloth bundle, the size of a small loaf of bread, which she suspected was paper and not bread. His eyes moved over her once. He nodded. "Coffee." "Yes." He poured her a tin cup. She drank it standing. Levi came in from the back door, carrying an armful of split kindling. He saw her and stopped. He did not blush this time. He had been awake too long for blushing. "The mules are loaded," he said. 4 deer, 2 days of grain for ourselves, a canvas roll. Garrett is bringing the horses around." "Thank you, Levi." He nodded. He set the kindling by the hearth. He paused. "Miss Whitfield." "Verity." He swallowed. "Verity, if I had known 2 years ago that my letter would bring you into this, you would have written it anyway, because the law firm told you someone needed help. Yes, then there is nothing to apologize for." He looked at his boots. "I have one thing to ask. Ask, when this is over, if we are still standing, will you teach me the dot writing, the system, the one your father knew?" She did not expect that. She blinked. She smiled. It was the first real smile she had felt in her face in 3 weeks. "Yes, I will teach you." Garrett opened the door. Cold came in with him. "Mounted up. Light is rising." Silas reached for his coat. He stopped. He looked at Verity one more time. "Last chance to stay. The cabin is yours. We can ride this without you." "No, you cannot." "Verity, I have the only thing in this canyon that will make Delshay listen. You can ride into his camp with 4 deer, but 4 deer have ridden into Apache camps before. A silver comb with his sister's name carved on it in Eastern dot letters has never ridden into his camp. Not once. Not ever." Silas exhaled. A long breath. Almost a laugh. "Almost. You are your father's daughter. I am hoping that is true." They rode out at full light. Silas in front on the bay gelding. Verity behind him on a smaller gray mare that Levi had brought down from the high pasture in October and gentled himself. Garrett at the rear leading the 2 mules. Levi remained at the cabin with the 2nd rifle and instructions to ride for the trading post if no one returned by sundown. The trail dropped along the eastern face of the canyon. Verity had never ridden a horse before her arrival in Colorado. She had ridden the gray mare for 10 minutes a day during the storm under Levi's patient instruction. 10 minutes a day for 4 days was not training. It was a wish, but the mare was patient. The mare knew the trail. Verity gripped the reins. She kept her back straight. She breathed. She thought, "Father, if you are anywhere near me this morning, hold my hands on these reins, just for the next hour, just until we get there." The sun rose behind the eastern ridge. The smoke from the Apache camp grew larger as they descended. They came down into the bowl of land below the eastern rim, 2 hours after sunrise. A boy was watching them from the edge of the camp. He was perhaps 19. He held a bow. He had not strung an arrow. His face was very still. Silas raised a gloved hand. He spoke a word in Apache. Verity did not catch it. The boy did not respond. A minute passed, then another minute. The wind moved through the junipers behind them with a low, dry sound. Then an older man stepped through the brush shelters at the camp's edge. He was perhaps 60. perhaps older. His face had been worked on by time the way a river works on stone. He wore a blanket over his shoulders. He held nothing in his hands. He looked at Silas. He looked at the mules. He looked at Verity. His eyes paused on her hair, on the silver comb. His face did not change, but Verity saw the muscle in his jaw go tight. He said something to the boy. The boy lowered the bow. He stepped aside. The old man said in clear, careful English, "Bring the meat. The woman will speak inside the lodge." His name was Delche. He led them past the outer ring of shelters and into the center of the camp, where a long fire pit burned low. Women looked up from their work. A small boy ran behind a hide stretcher and watched them with one eye. A dog crossed in front of the mules and did not bark. Verity counted as she passed. She counted 47 people that she could see from the path, knowing the lodges held more. 47 people in early December, burning their fire so thin the smoke barely rose, mending the same blankets that had already been mended twice this winter. She felt something pull tight in her chest. The lodge was at the center of the camp, a canvas structure stretched over a frame of bent saplings. A small fire burned inside. The smoke went up through an opening at the top. The air was warm. The light was gold and red. A woman sat by the fire. She was perhaps 28. Her dark hair had a single early streak of gray at one temple. She wore a dress of soft-worked deerskin. A silver chain hung around her neck. She looked up when they entered. Her eyes went straight to Verity. She did not move. She did not speak. Delche said, "This is Nasha, my sister's daughter, the only one in this camp who carries the Eastern tongue with ease. She will speak with you." Silas put a hand at the small of Verity's back. Light, barely there, just enough to tell her. Now. Verity stepped forward. She knelt by the fire. She reached up. She drew the silver comb from her hair. She held it out across the fire on her open palm. Nasha did not move for a long moment. Then she leaned forward. She took the comb very carefully. She turned it in her fingers. She turned it over. She ran her thumb along the underside of the handle across the 6 dots in their cells, the way Verity had run her own thumb across them 1,000 times without knowing. She closed her hand around the comb. She closed her eyes, and Nasha began to cry without sound. The tears moved down her face and dropped into her lap, and she did not lift a hand to wipe them. Delche watched his niece. He did not interrupt. After perhaps a full minute, Nasha opened her eyes. She looked at Verity. She said, "My father gave this to me when I was 13, he said. He said a white man with blue eyes had carried it across the mountain on his own horse. He said this man had saved my younger brother from a militia rider. He said this man had carved my name into the handle in the writing his daughter would learn one day. He said, if I ever needed help, I should send a letter east through a Boston firm, and the help would come." Verity could not speak. "It came," Nasha said. 12 years, Verity whispered. "He has been gone 12 years." "He has not been gone." Verity raised her head. Nasha's eyes were dark and wet and burning. "He has been gone from your house. He has ought to been gone from this canyon. We tell our children about him in the winter when the meat is thin and the fires are small. We tell them about the Eastern man with the blue eyes who carried a Beaumont brother out of a prison wagon 10 years after he died, because he had asked Beaumonts to be ready, and they were ready. We tell them his daughter would come. We did not know when, we did not know how. We knew the comb would come back to this fire. The fire popped. A piece of cedar dropped into the coals. Verity put her face in her hands. Silas knelt beside her. He did not touch her. He just stayed. She lifted her face. She looked at Nasha through the fire. She said, "My uncle is coming." Nasha's face did not change. "We know. You know." A rider came in the night, from the south end of the valley. A Mexican boy. He works for the trading post man. He said your uncle's column was lighting lanterns at midnight. He said they had not stopped to sleep. He said they will be at the canyon mouth before mid-morning. Verity looked at Silas. Silas looked at Delche. Delche nodded once. "The wire your young friend sent. We do not yet know if it reached Denver. We do not yet know if your federal man is moving. The canyon does not have time to wait for him." "Then what?" Delche sat down across the fire from her, slowly, like a man whose knees did not bend the way they used to. "You said to Beaumont that you came here looking for your uncle. Tell me what that means." Verity drew the lawyer's letter from inside her bodice. She unfolded it. She held it across the fire to Nasha. "My father did not die from a fall. He was poisoned. The man who did it was his own brother-in-law. My mother's brother. My uncle, the man who became my legal guardian and the executor of my father's estate. $80,000. 3 pieces of land in Pennsylvania. A textile interest in Boston. All of it under his control until I turned 24. Nasha read the letter. She passed it to Delche. Delche read it slowly. His English was not as smooth as his niece's, but it held. He set the letter down on a small wooden board beside the fire so the paper would not curl. "There is more," Verity said. "More. My father kept records. He suspected my uncle for 2 years before he died. He had been gathering documents, names of officers under my uncle's command who had taken bribes to look the other way during land seizures. Names of 3 families whose deeds my uncle forged after their men were killed in the war. Names, dates, sums of money. A ledger." Delche's eyes sharpened. "Where?" "My father told the law firm he had hidden the ledger in the only place my uncle would never look. He told the firm he had placed it in the safekeeping of a friend who lived 1,200 miles from Boston. A friend my uncle did not know existed. A friend my uncle could not reach without revealing himself." Delche leaned forward. "Who?" Verity looked at Nasha. Nasha had gone very still. "He told the firm," Verity said softly, "that the ledger was in the hands of a woman named Nasha, whose father had asked him for help in the winter of '63. And who had received a silver comb in return." The fire popped again. A child cried somewhere in the camp and was hushed by a woman's voice. Nasha did not move. She did not speak. Then she stood up. She crossed the lodge to a low wooden chest covered in worked hide. She knelt beside it. She opened it. She lifted out a folded square of soft deerskin, wrapped in a piece of trade cloth. She brought it back to the fire. She placed it in Verity's hands. 12 years, Nasha said. "I have kept it for 12 years. My father told me before he died. A box would come from the east. I was to keep it. I was never to open it. If a young woman came to this camp with the silver comb, I was to give it to her. Only her." Verity unwrapped the deerskin. Inside lay a leather-bound ledger, brown cover, worn corners, a small brass clasp. She opened it. She read the first page. Her father's handwriting filled the line. December the 4th, 1866. The accounts and accusations herein are the work of Edmund Whitfield of Boston, sworn true upon his name, and the names of God and his daughter Verity. Verity closed her eyes. She held the ledger to her chest. Silas watched her. Delshay watched her. Nasha watched her. When she opened her eyes, she was not crying. She was something else. She was steel. "My uncle," she said, "is going to arrive at the mouth of this canyon in 2 hours. He is going to ride up this trail with 30 men. He is going to find this camp. He is going to find this cabin. He is going to demand that the Beaumont brothers turn me over. He is going to claim that a fugitive ward has run from her lawful guardian and taken refuge with hostile parties. He is going to use the language of the Indian wars to justify burning this camp to the ground." She looked at Delshay. "He will not get the chance." Delshay studied her. "Why?" "Because we are going to meet him at the canyon mouth before he begins the climb. Because I am going to step out of cover with this ledger in my hands. Because I am going to read 3 names from it in front of his own officers. And because the moment those officers hear those names, the column will no longer follow him. And if his officers do follow him, then we have rifles, and we have the canyon, and we have a federal marshal on a wire that I hope to God reach Denver before the storm close the line." Silas spoke for the first time. "It reached." She turned. "How do you know?" "I do not. I am choosing to believe it, because the alternative is unbearable." Delshay almost smiled. It was the first crack in his face Verity had seen. He stood up. "Toga." The young man with the bow stepped through the door of the lodge. Delshay spoke in Apache, long, calm, specific. Toga answered in 2 short words. He went back outside. Delshay turned to Verity. 10 of our men will ride with you to the canyon mouth, not to fight your uncle's column, to witness. The column will see Apache riders standing behind a white woman holding a ledger. They will see federal evidence in the hands of the lawful heir. They will see that whatever your uncle says next will be heard by witnesses who can speak." Delshay. "Yes, thank you." He looked at her for a long, still moment. "Edmund Whitfield carried my younger brother on his horse for 9 miles through snow when my brother was 7 years old. He did not know us. He did not need to help us. He helped us, and the help has been waiting 12 years to come home." Verity bowed her head. She tied the ledger inside the deerskin wrap and slid it under her coat against the lawyer's letter. She stood up. She replaced the silver comb in her hair. She walked out of the lodge into the cold. Outside, the camp had moved. Toga was mounting a small spotted horse. 2 older men were already on theirs. A boy of 14 sat very straight on a paint pony, trying not to look afraid and not succeeding. 3 other men were checking their gear. A young woman handed up a wrapped bundle of dried meat to one of the riders. The Apache had not waited for anyone to ask twice. Silas appeared at Verity's elbow. He held the bay gelding's reins in one hand and her mare's reins in the other. He looked at her. She looked at him. She said, "I have been in Colorado 5 days. Yes. I have known you 4 days. Yes. I am about to ride into a confrontation with 30 armed United States soldiers, led by a colonel who poisoned my father. Yes. I would like you to know. Yes." She drew in a breath. "I would like you to know that whatever happens at the canyon mouth in the next hour, the only thing I am afraid of is not telling you. So I am telling you. I am very glad it was you who came to meet the coach, and I am very glad it is your hand on these reins right now." Silas did not answer in words. He stepped forward. He took her gloved hand in his. He brought it up. He pressed it once against his own chest, over his coat, over his heart, the way a man might press a letter he was not yet ready to send. He let her hand go. He helped her up onto the mare. He swung up onto the bay. He looked at Delche. Delche nodded. The riders moved. They came out of the bowl of land at a controlled pace, not slow, not fast, the pace of people who have decided. Silas, Verity, Garrett, then Toga and 3 of the older Apache men, then the other 6 riders, 13 in all, plus the 2 mules which Garrett had insisted on bringing, because as he put it through his teeth, if this turned out to be a normal day after all, somebody was going to need to haul wood back. The canyon mouth was 4 miles south. They covered 3 of them in a quarter hour. At the last bend, Silas raised a gloved hand. The riders stopped. He dismounted. He walked forward to the edge of an outcropping of red stone and looked down. He came back. He did not speak right away. Garrett pulled his horse close. "How may?" 30, as Pell said. 2 officers riding ahead. The colonel is in the center. And there is a man riding to the colonel's left in a black coat. Garrett went very still. A clerical collar. Yes. Caldwell. Yes. Verity gripped her reins. Caldwell, the reverend who had met her at the coach, who had stood on the platform in Silver Creek with that small, careful smile, who had married couples in his church and brokered a marriage on a wire, who had sent a telegram to her uncle 6 days before she arrived. Caldwell was not a country reverend. Caldwell was her uncle's eyes in Silver Creek. She closed her own eyes. Of course there had to be a man on the ground who arranged the brokered marriage. Of course her uncle could not run a frontier operation from Denver alone. Of course the man with the soft smile had been the local hand of the colonel for years, possibly decades. She opened her eyes. She looked at Silas. "How long has Caldwell been in Silver Creek?" 15 years. Came up the year the silver played out. Built that white church on subscriptions. People liked him. My father visited this canyon in the winter of '63. Yes, Caldwell was already here. Yes. She felt the cold move through her again, but this time it was not fear. This time it was the cold of a piece sliding into place. Silas. Yes. My father would not have wired a Boston firm about a silver comb without first writing to a friend on the ground in Silver Creek. He would have wanted someone closer who could verify Nash's safety. He would have written to the Reverend at the only church in town. He would not have known the Reverend was Hale's man. Silas exhaled long and slow. That is how your father was found out. That is the leak. Caldwell read your father's letter to Silver Creek. Caldwell wrote to Hale. Hale poisoned your father within the month. Yes, and Caldwell has been waiting 15 years to see what would happen when the comb came home. Yes, and now he is riding up this canyon at your uncle's left hand. Yes. She drew in a long breath. Toga rode forward to them. He looked at Silas. He looked at Verity. He held up one hand and turned the palm down. A gesture Verity did not yet know how to read. Silas nodded once. We do this now, or we do not do it at all. The column is 40 minutes from the canyon mouth. The trail narrows ahead. There is a stand of pines 300 yards south. We meet them there. Apache witnesses spread along the rocks above. You and I in the trail. Garrett at our flank. Ledger in your hand. Comb in your hair. The first words spoken are yours, not theirs. Are we agreed? Agreed. Verity. Yes. If this goes badly, if the colonel orders his men to fire, you drop the ledger, and you ride back the way we came. You ride hard. You do not stop. You go past the camp and over the eastern saddle, and you keep going until you reach Marshal Cole or his deputy or any United States authority you can find. You do not turn around to see what is happening behind you. You promise me. I promise. Say it. I promise. He looked at her one more time. He nodded. The riders moved. They came down through the stand of pines at a walk. The trail at the canyon mouth was a narrow channel of beaten earth between two rising shoulders of red rock. The pines lined the rim on both sides. Beyond the pines, the trail opened into the floor of the lower valley. Silas placed the riders carefully. Toga and 3 Apache men took the eastern rim above. 2 more took the western rim. The remaining 4 held back in the pines behind Verity and Silas. Garrett moved to a point 20 yards south of where Verity stood, where he could see the trail clearly, without being immediately visible. Verity stood in the center of the trail. The ledger was in her left hand. Her right hand hung loose at her side. The silver comb caught the pale morning sun in her hair. Silas stood 10 feet behind her, and to her right. She could hear her own heartbeat. She could hear a single jay calling from somewhere in the pines. She could hear the wind, and then she could hear the column. It came around the bend in the lower trail, at a steady walk. The horses were tired. The men were tired. They had been riding through the night. Verity could see it in the way they slumped in their saddles. 2 officers led. A young captain, perhaps 30. He carried himself well. A lieutenant beside him. Younger, watchful. Behind them rode a man Verity had not seen in 3 years. Colonel Thaddeus Hale was 61 years old. His face was weathered the way wealthy men's faces are weathered by careful exposure rather than by labor. His mustache was iron gray. His eyes were the same pale blue her mother's had been. He sat his horse like a man who had sat horses for 40 years and would sit them for 40 more. To his left, also mounted, rode the Reverend Edmund Caldwell. Caldwell saw her first. He was the only one who knew her face. The smile flickered across his soft mouth. Then it died. Because she did not look like a frightened ward who had been hauled out of a cabin. She looked like her father. Caldwell turned his head slightly. He spoke a single word to the colonel. The colonel raised his hand. The column halted. 30 horses stopped on the trail with the long sigh of leather and breath the 30 halting horses make. Verity took 1 step forward. She raised the ledger so that it was visible. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The morning was so still that even the captain in the front of the column could hear her clearly. She said, "Captain, my name is Verity Whitfield. I am the daughter of Edmund Whitfield of Boston. I am 24 years old. I am of legal majority under the laws of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I am not a fugitive. I am not a hostage. I am the lawful sole heir of an estate currently held under the executorship of the man riding directly behind you, Colonel Thaddeus Hale, who is my mother's brother." The captain did not move, but his eyes did. They moved from her face to her hair, to the silver comb, to the ledger, back to her face. She continued, "I have come from Philadelphia, At the request of a Boston law firm, Cromwell, Eaton and Pierce, holding instructions written by my father 1 week before his death in 1866. I have in my possession the documents he hid before he died. The documents in this ledger record the names of 3 families whose deeds were forged by Colonel Hale during and after the war. The names of 4 officers under his command who accepted bribes from him to facilitate the seizure of Apache land in this canyon. And the testimony of an Apache woman whose father witnessed the colonel's first false land claim in this region in 1863. I will read 3 names now. I am asking you to listen. She opened the ledger. She read, Captain Joseph Ridley, of the 4th Cavalry, 1864. $300 accepted in exchange for the suppression of an inquiry into the deaths of 2 homesteaders on Apache land. A man in the column made a small sound. She continued, Captain Marcus Holloway, of the 4th Cavalry, 1865. $200 accepted in exchange for the alteration of a survey map. Behind the captain, a soldier shifted in his saddle. She continued, Lieutenant Edgar Pruitt of the 4th Cavalry, 1866. $150 accepted to certify a forged deed in the name of Hale Holdings Limited. She closed the ledger. She looked up. She looked past the young captain. She looked at her uncle. Colonel Thaddeus Hale had gone the color of paper. He had not expected this. He had expected a girl in a wagon. He had expected a frightened ward in a cabin. He had not expected his niece to be standing in the canyon mouth, reading from her father's own handwriting the names of officers who were almost certainly still in his command. He recovered. He had not become a colonel by failing to recover. He raised his voice. Captain Stearns, the young woman is delusional. She has clearly been coached by these mountain men. Arrest her companions. Take her into protective custody. We will sort the matter at the garrison. The young captain did not move. He looked at the ledger in Verity's hand. He looked at the silver comb in her hair. He looked at the Apache riders he had now seen on both rims above him. He looked at his own column. Then he looked back at Verity. He said, Miss Whitfield, with respect, do you possess sworn affidavits? I do. From whom? From my father, dated December the 4th, 1866. And from a woman named Nasha, sister-daughter of the Apache leader Del Shea, who has held this ledger in trust for 12 years and is at this moment available to give testimony in person at this canyon. The captain's mouth tightened. He turned in his saddle. Lieutenant Brewer, sir, stand the column down. Hold position. No man dismounts without my order. Sir. The colonel's voice rose. Captain Stearns, I am ordering you to. Colonel, with respect, I serve at the pleasure of the United States Army, not at yours personally. A federal warrant arrived by wire at the Silver Creek Telegraph office at 4 this morning. It was forwarded to our camp at 6. The warrant authorizes Marshal Jeremiah Cole of the United States Marshal Service to take into custody one Colonel Thaddeus Hale on charges of fraud conspiracy and the suspected murder of Edmund Whitfield in 1866. The wire instructed the Army to hold Colonel Hale pending the Marshal's arrival, expected within 24 hours. I have been carrying that wire in my coat for 2 hours, waiting to see what kind of canyon I was riding into. The colonel's mouth opened. It did not close right away. Caldwell was already turning his horse. He had seen it before the colonel had. He had been a man on the ground in a frontier town for 15 years. He knew when an operation was finished. Caldwell turned his horse to the east into the broken country off the trail. He kicked once, his horse leapt forward. He made it 3 strides before Toga's voice cracked from the rim above, and a single arrow went into the ground 6 inches in front of his horse's hooves. The horse shied. The Reverend nearly came off. 2 Apache riders dropped down off the western rim and closed on him before he could recover. They took the Reverend off his horse without speaking. They walked him back to the trail. He did not resist. He had gone the color of paper, too. The colonel sat very still on his horse. He looked at Verity. He looked at her for a long time. He said, "You look like your mother." Verity did not answer. "She was my sister. You know that. I know that. She would not have wanted this for me. You poisoned my father." The colonel did not answer. That was all the answer. Captain Stern spoke. "Colonel Hale, please demount, slowly. Hands where I can see them. You are not yet under arrest. You are being held pending the arrival of a federal officer. Lieutenant Brewer will take your sidearm." The colonel did not move. For one long moment, Verity thought he might do something foolish. But the colonel had not become a colonel by doing foolish things either. He dismounted slowly. He handed his sidearm to the lieutenant. He looked at Verity one more time. He said, "Your father was a small man with a small understanding of large affairs." Verity stepped forward. She walked the 12 feet between them. She looked up into his face. She said, "My father was a man who carried a child on his horse for 9 miles through snow. You spent your life arranging the deaths of people who could not defend themselves. He was not small. You are not large, and you will not speak of him again." She turned her back on him. She walked back to Silas. She did not stop until she reached his bay gelding. She put her forehead against the warm neck of the horse and closed her eyes. Silas placed his hand at her back. Light, just there. The captain was already organizing his men. The Apache riders were already coming down off the rims. The Reverend was already in irons. Garrett was riding up the trail at a fast trot to meet them, his rifle across his lap, his face for the first time in 2 years, showing something other than wariness. The young captain dismounted. He walked to Verity. He removed his hat. He said, "Miss Whitfield." She raised her head. "Yes." "Marshal Cole and his deputies left Denver yesterday morning on a fast train. He should reach Silver Creek by tomorrow forenoon. He will take formal custody of the colonel and the Reverend at that time. We will hold them at the trading post overnight under our own guard." "Thank you, Captain." "Miss Whitfield." "Yes. How long have you been carrying that ledger?" Verity smiled. It was very small. It did not reach her eyes yet because her eyes were full of her father. She said, 1 hour. The captain looked at the silver comb in her hair. He looked at the Apache riders coming down from the rims. He looked at the 3 Beaumont brothers, only 2 of them present, 1 still at the cabin, all of them connected to a story he was clearly only beginning to understand. He said, "Miss Whitfield, I believe you are going to have to tell that story more than once before this winter is over." "Yes, Captain. And I believe a great many people in the United States Army are going to want to hear it." "Yes." He bowed slightly. He put his hat back on. He returned to his men. Verity turned to Silas. She did not speak. She did not need to. Silas drew her against him. Just for a moment. Just the breath of a long breath. just long enough for her to feel that the man whose hand had pressed her glove to his chest an hour ago was the same man whose chest she was now pressed against in the middle of a canyon trail in the Colorado Rockies, under the gaze of 10 Apache riders and one young United States captain, and the bound figure of a man in a black coat. Then he stepped back. He looked down at her. He said, "Verity. Yes. The ledger. Yes. It is heavy. It is. Put it back inside your coat. Marshal Cole will want it intact. We have a long ride home." She slid the ledger back inside the deerskin wrap. She slid the wrap back under her coat against the lawyer's letter, and her father's name and the silver comb, and the woman she had become in 8 days. She mounted the gray mare. The riders turned. The trail led north up the canyon back the way they had come, toward the cabin, toward Levi waiting at the door with a rifle and a kettle, toward a fire that would be burning because Levi would never let it go out. Not today, not on the morning his sister in everything but blood rode back from a confrontation he had not been allowed to attend. Behind them, the column began to move out of the canyon mouth, escorting 2 men who would not be free men again. Above them, the pale December sun finally found enough strength to warm the red rock face. And somewhere far below in the lower valley, a federal marshal named Jeremiah Cole was riding hard toward a story he had been waiting 12 years to close. Verity rode in front of Silas this time. She kept her back straight. She kept her hands on the reins. She didn't look back, because some things are better understood by carrying them forward. The ride back to the cabin took 2 hours. Verity did not remember most of it. She remembered the cold against her face. She remembered the rhythm of the mare's hooves on packed snow. She remembered Silas's bay gelding moving beside her, never ahead, never behind. Just there. She remembered Garrett at the rear, riding silent, his rifle across his lap, his eyes on every rise of rock they passed. She did not remember the conversation she must have had with Toga when they parted ways at the camp turnoff, but she remembered his face. The young man who had stood at the edge of the camp that morning with a bow he had not strung now sat his pony with the easy carriage of a witness who had ridden out and ridden back and seen a thing through to its end. He raised his hand to her once. She raised hers in return. The Apache riders peeled away east toward the bowl of land where their fires were waiting. The Beaumonts turned north. The cabin came into view at mid-afternoon. Levi was standing on the porch with a rifle in one hand and a kettle in the other, and an expression on his face that broke when he saw them. He set the rifle down. He set the kettle down. He came down the porch steps in his shirt sleeves into snow that came over the tops of his boots. He reached Verity's stirrup. He looked up at her. He said, "You came back. I came back. All of you. All of us." Levi pressed his forehead briefly against the mare's shoulder. Then he straightened. He held up his hands to help her down. She took them. She slid out of the saddle into the snow and into his careful young embrace. And for the second time that day, she allowed herself to lean. Just for a breath, just enough. Levi let her go. He turned to Silas. He said, "The wire. It reached. The marshal is on his way. He will be at the cabin by tomorrow forenoon. And the colonel, in irons, with his reverend. The army is holding them overnight at the trading post." Levi closed his eyes for one long second. When he opened them, he said the only thing he was capable of saying. "There is stew." Marshal Jeremiah Cole arrived at the cabin at 11 the following morning, after spending the night at the Silver Creek trading post with the colonel and reverend in his custody. He came up the trail with 2 deputies and a pack mule and a folded oilskin packet that he carried inside his coat. He was perhaps 55 years old. He wore a long gray duster. He had the kind of face that did not change much whether he was pleased or displeased, which Verity recognized at once as the face of a man who had learned long ago not to spend his expressions on people who had not earned them. He spent 2 expressions on Verity inside the first 10 minutes. The first was a small, respectful nod when she introduced herself. The second was a longer look, almost a study, when she placed the ledger and the lawyer's letter and her father's 3rd page on the long table in front of him. He sat down at the table. He read for 37 minutes. He did not speak during those 37 minutes. Verity sat on the bench across from him with her hands folded in her lap. Silas stood by the fire. Garrett stood by the door. Levi brought the marshal a tin cup of coffee at the 20-minute mark and did not interrupt him. At the 37th minute, Marshal Cole closed the ledger. He set both hands flat on the cover. He looked at Verity. He said, "Miss Whitfield, I have been a federal marshal for 19 years. In all those years, I have not held in my hands a piece of evidence as complete as this one. I want you to understand that what you are giving me today will be the foundation of a case that will end the careers of a number of men in 2 territories and probably the state of Massachusetts. Some of those men are powerful. Some of them are friends of senators. The trial will be long. It may take a year. You will be required to testify." "I understand. You may also be required to come to Denver and to Boston more than once." "I understand. Your uncle's defense will be aggressive. They will attempt to discredit you. They will dig into your school records, your associations, your family history. They will try to suggest that you were unwell, that you were coached, that you fabricated the ledger. They will fail." "How do you know?" "Because the ledger is in my father's hand. Because Apache witnesses can testify to the chain of custody for the last 12 years. Because Reverend Caldwell, who I suspect is breaking already, was personally present at 3 of the events recorded in those pages. And because the silver comb in my hair is engraved on the underside with the name of the woman who kept the ledger, in the raised dot writing my father invented for me, which my uncle has never seen, does not know exists, and cannot fabricate." Marshal Cole studied her for a long moment. A very small smile moved the corner of his mouth. "Miss Whitfield, yes, you are going to ruin your uncle. Yes. Good." He stood up. He gathered the ledger and the letter into the oilskin packet. He looked at Silas. He said, "Mr. Beaumont, the army captain at the canyon mouth, gave me to understand that this lady stayed under your roof for the last week. I will need a statement from you and your brothers regarding the conduct of that stay, for the record, to preempt any suggestion of impropriety from the defense." Silas met his eyes. "She slept in the back room, with the door bolted from the inside, by her own hand. We slept in the main room on bedrolls. The bolt is still on that door. You may inspect it." The marshal nodded once. "Thank you. That will do." He turned back to Verity. "Miss Whitfield, there is one more matter." "Yes." "Your father's estate. It has been under your uncle's control since 1866. We will be moving immediately to freeze his access to all accounts in Boston and Denver. There will be an audit. There will likely be substantial restitution. The textile interest is the largest piece. The Pennsylvania land is intact. You should be aware that when the dust settles, you will be a wealthy woman. Not extravagantly so, but more than comfortably. She felt the words land. She had not let herself think about money. Not once. Not since Philadelphia. She nodded slowly. Thank you, Marshal. Will you be returning east? She did not answer right away. She felt the hush in the room. She felt Silas behind her very still. She felt Levi at the hearth holding his breath. She felt Garrett at the door looking at the floor with an intensity that meant he was listening with every part of himself. She said, Marshal Cole, I will travel to Boston when you require me to testify. I will travel to Denver when you require me. I will write whatever depositions you ask. But Philadelphia was where I lived, it was not where I belonged, and I do not believe I will be making my home there again. I see. There is a school for the blind in Denver, a small one. I have already inquired about it by letter twice this year. They have been looking for a teacher of the new dot system. I see. And there is a cabin 2 days east of Denver in a canyon I have come to know where the wind moves down the eastern slope of the Rocky Mountains in a particular way that I would like to listen to for the rest of my life. The Marshal's small smile became slightly less small. He picked up his hat. He said, Miss Whitfield, I have a feeling I will be wiring you in Silver Creek before the spring. You may marshal. He bowed. He gathered his deputies. He rode out at noon with the ledger in his coat and a copy of the lawyer's letter in his deputy's saddlebag, and instructions to wire Boston the moment he reached Denver. Verity stood on the porch and watched him go, until he disappeared around the bend in the trail. Behind her, the cabin door opened. Silas stepped out. He stood beside her at the porch rail. He did not speak for a long time. Then he said, Denver, Denver, a school, 2 days east of Denver. She did not turn her head. 2 days east of Denver. He was still for another moment. He said, Verity, yes, you do not owe us a residence. I know. You do not owe my brother a teacher. I know. You do not owe me a thing. I know. A long pause. She turned then. She looked up at him. The light at mid-afternoon in the Colorado Rockies in December is the color of a candle behind paper. It fell across his face in stripes. The lines at the corners of his eyes were not the lines of a hard man. They were the lines of a man who had spent 12 years deciding whether he was going to feel anything ever again. She said, I am not staying because I owe. No. I'm staying because in 8 days I have built more of a life inside that cabin than I built in 24 years inside any house in the East. I am staying because Levi is the only person who has ever asked to learn my father's writing without first asking me what it was for. I am staying because Garrett looked me in the eye yesterday morning and asked me to forgive a man who has not yet learned how to separate a name from a person. I am staying because the Apache rode out with us at dawn because of a comb my father carved 15 years ago. And I want to live in a country where a thing like that can be true. And I am staying because of you. He did not answer right away. He looked out at the canyon. He said, I buried a wife and a son in St. Louis 12 years ago. I came up here to die in this cabin. I did not die. I cannot tell you why. I have not been able to tell anyone why for 12 years. You do not have to. I think I do. I think I am going to. He turned to face her. He took off his glove. He raised his bare hand to her cheek. He did not touch her at first. He held his hand a half inch away from her skin. the way a man holds his hand over a fire to test the heat, because he has been cold a very long time, and he does not yet trust that warmth is a thing he can have again. Then he let his hand rest against her cheek. She closed her eyes. She did not move. He said, "I am 42 years old. I have nothing to offer you that anyone in the East would consider an offer. I have this cabin. I have my brothers. I have a smokehouse full of meat and 100 acres of trapping ground and a horse and 2 mules and a debt to your father that I will not finish paying in this life. And I have the certainty, which I did not have an hour ago, that the rest of whatever I have will be better spent inside the same walls as you than anywhere else in the world." Verity did not open her eyes. She put her gloved hand over his bare one. She held it there. She said, "Then ask." Verity Whitfield. Yes. Will you stay? Yes. All of it. The cabin, the canyon, the winters, the Apache, the teaching, the testifying, the trips east, the trips back, the years. All of it. And me. And you. He let out a breath she had not known he was holding. He drew her against him. She felt his chin rest on the crown of her hair, just above the silver comb, just where her father had once carried her, on his shoulder when she was a child small enough to be carried. The porch was still. The cabin was still. The canyon was still. And somewhere inside her, very far down the small, steady voice that had been keeping her upright since the Tuesday in Philadelphia, when the letter arrived, finally allowed itself to sit down. It did not stop speaking. It simply sat. Marshal Cole returned to Silver Creek 2 weeks later. He stayed 2 nights at the trading post and rode up to the cabin on the second morning with a folder of papers and a deputy and a small wooden box. The folder contained the preliminary findings of the Boston audit. The deputy carried a writ of restitution. The wooden box contained a wedding band that had once belonged to Verity's mother. It had been recovered from a safe deposit box in Boston that had been registered in Colonel Hale's name for the last 12 years. The marshal landed Verity the box on the porch. He said, "I thought you would want this back." She opened the box. She lifted out the ring. It was a thin gold band, worn smooth on the inside from 20 years of marriage. There was an inscription on the inner curve. She did not need light to read it. She turned it in her fingers. She read it with her thumb. For E from V, 1853. She closed her hand around it. She did not cry. She had cried enough that month. She put the ring on the 3rd finger of her right hand and turned it once. She said, "Thank you, Marshal." "Miss Whitfield." "Yes. The trial begins in March, in Boston first, then a separate proceeding in Denver in June. You will need to be available. I have made arrangements with the railroad. Your passage will be paid. A federal escort will accompany you both ways." "Yes. And Mr. Beaumont." Silas, standing at her elbow, raised his eyebrows. "Yes. You are listed in the case file as a material witness for the prosecution on 3 counts. You will also be required to travel." "All right. The first appearance is March the 14th, in Boston." Silas nodded slowly. He said, "Miss Whitfield and I would like to be married before then." Verity had not known he was going to say it like that, out loud, to a federal marshal, on a Tuesday morning, in front of a deputy. But he had said it, and she had heard it, and the small, steady voice inside her made a small surprise sound. Marshal Cole's small smile returned. He said, "Mr. Beaumont, I am also a federal magistrate when called upon. If the ceremony were performed on federal authority, the records would travel with my office and would not be subject to interference by any local clerk who may once have answered to Reverend Caldwell. Silas looked at Verity. Verity looked at Silas. She said, "Tomorrow. Tomorrow." The marshal nodded once. He said, "Tomorrow at noon, on this porch. I will return with my deputy as witness. Mr. Beaumont, I assume your brothers will serve as the second and third witnesses." "They will. Miss Whitfield, the Apache woman. Nasha, would you like her present?" Verity drew in a long breath. She said, "Yes." "Then I will ride to the camp this afternoon and ask. I do not believe Delche will refuse the invitation." He bowed. He left. She stood on the porch with the gold ring on her right hand and a stunned look on her face. Silas turned to her. He said, "Was I supposed to ask you first?" "You did ask me first. 2 weeks ago. I said yes. That was not. That was Silas Beaumont. Yes, it counted." The wedding took place on the porch of the cabin at noon on the 3rd of December, 1878. Verity wore the dark green wool dress Levi had brought up from Silver Creek on a fast trip the day before, which was the only piece of clothing she now owned that had not been chosen for her by anyone in Boston or Philadelphia. Silas wore his cleanest shirt, which Verity had washed and pressed herself, and a string tie he had not worn since he was 24 years old. The silver comb was in her hair. Her mother's gold band was in Silas's coat pocket. Garrett stood at his brother's right shoulder. He had cut his beard. Verity had not asked him to. He had simply done it. He looked younger than she had known he could look. Levi stood at her left shoulder. He was holding a small leather-covered book. It was a copy of his mother's Bible. He had marked the page she had asked for, which was not a wedding passage at all. It was the first chapter of the Book of Ruth. Marshal Cole stood between them with his deputy at his shoulder. Delche stood on the porch step below the marshal. He had come up from the camp at dawn with Nasha. Nasha stood beside him wearing a dress of soft worked deerskin and the silver chain that had hung around her neck since Verity first met her. Toga and 4 other Apache riders stood in the snow at the foot of the porch. Tobias Pell, who had ridden up from Silver Creek with a federal letter in his pocket and refused to ride back until the ceremony was over, stood at the corner of the porch with his hat in his hand and a smile on his face that he could not seem to put down. Marshal Cole opened a small leather book. He read the federal marriage rite. When he came to the place where the bride was asked to speak, Verity did not speak the words the marshal had read out. She spoke her own. She said, "Silas Beaumont, I came up this canyon 3 weeks ago with a trunk and a letter and a name I had been told for 12 years was the name of my father's friend. I did not know if you were real. I did not know if my father had been right to send me. I did not know if I would be welcomed in your house. I did not know if I would leave it alive. I know now. I am alive. I am welcomed. My father was right, and I would like to spend the rest of my life inside the same walls as you in this canyon under this sky in your country. Yeah." She turned slightly. She included the other 2 brothers in the next part. She said, "And in your family. Both of you. Yes." Garrett's jaw tightened. He looked at the porch boards. He nodded once. Levi closed his eyes for 1 second. He smiled. Silas put his hand over Verity's. He said, "Verity Whitfield, I have been alone in this canyon 12 years. I built this cabin to be a place where I could finish a grief I did not believe could be finished. The grief is finished. I do not know when it ended. Some morning between the storm and the marshal. I am 42 years old. I am offering you what is left. It is more than I thought it was. It is yours. He raised her hand. He kissed the inside of her wrist. He slid her mother's gold band onto her ring finger. Marshal Cole closed his book. He said, "By the authority of the United States of America, I declare you husband and wife." The Apache riders raised their hands. Tobias Pell let out a small whoop he could not contain. Garrett, who had not laughed in 5 years, found himself laughing twice that afternoon, once when Tobias whooped, and once when Levi nearly dropped the Bible. Silas turned to Verity. She looked up at him. He bent his head. He kissed her. Once. Carefully. The way a man finally allows himself to come in out of the cold. The porch erupted into a small celebration that lasted exactly as long as the air allowed, before everyone moved inside to the fire. That evening, after the marshal and his deputy had ridden back down toward Silver Creek, after the Apache had gone home to the bowl of land below the eastern rim, after Tobias Pell had been bedded down on a pallet by the fire because the temperature had dropped too far for him to ride after Levi had washed the last of the dishes and Garrett had banked the fire. For the night, Silas closed the door of the back room behind himself and his wife. Outside, the first heavy snow of December began to fall on the canyon. Inside, the cabin held its breath and let it go. By morning, the cabin held one less stranger and one more family. Spring came late that year. The passes did not open until the second week of April. By then, much had already changed. Verity testified in Boston on the 14th of March. She traveled by train with Silas and a federal escort. She sat in a wood-paneled courtroom for 4 days and answered questions about her father, her uncle, her childhood. The lawyer's letter, the silver comb, the ledger, the Apache and the cabin. She did not waver. She did not cry on the stand. She read 3 pages of the ledger aloud and identified her father's handwriting. She held up the comb so the bench could see it. She explained the Braille engraving. The defense attorney attempted to suggest that a young woman who had grown up partly inside an institution for the blind might be subject to dependencies and influences that affected her testimony. Verity looked at him from the witness chair and said only, "Sir, I have taught children to read the world with their fingers. You should not assume that means I cannot see." The courtroom recessed early that afternoon. The defense did not reopen that line of questioning. The verdict in Boston came down in May. Colonel Thaddeus Hale was convicted on 6 counts, including the conspiracy to commit murder of Edmund Whitfield. He received a sentence of life imprisonment at a federal facility in New York. Reverend Edmund Caldwell, whose nerve had broken in March and who had testified for the prosecution in exchange for a reduced sentence, received 20 years. 3 officers from the 4th Cavalry were court-martialed in separate proceedings and dishonorably discharged. The Hale Holdings textile interest in Boston was placed into receivership. The Pennsylvania land was transferred into Verity's name. The audit took 18 months to complete. When it was finished, the total restitution awarded to the heirs of the 3 families whose deeds her uncle had forged came to $112,000. Verity insisted on this. Marshal Cole had to argue with the federal court to allow it, because the funds were technically hers. She prevailed. Verity Whitfield Beaumont kept what was left. It was as the marshal had told her that first November morning, enough to be more than comfortable. She used most of the first year's income to establish a school. The school was a small one-room building on a piece of land Silas owned at the bottom of the canyon, 4 miles from the cabin, where the trail leveled out onto a meadow that caught the morning sun. The school taught children to read both ordinary print and the new raised dot system. It was open to settlers, Apache children whose families wished to send them, and any child who could ride or walk to it. It became, in the second year, one of the only schools in the territory where a blind child and a sighted child sat at the same bench and learned the same lessons from the same teacher. Verity was that teacher. Levi was her assistant. He had learned the raised dot system in 3 months. He had a gift for it. He had also fallen in love in the spring of the second year with a young schoolmistress named Anna Pell, who had ridden up to the canyon from Silver Creek to consult with Verity about teaching methods. Anna Pell was Tobias Pell's older sister. She had been waiting 8 years for someone in that territory to read more than 5 books. Levi could now read in 3 different scripts. They were married in a small ceremony at the cabin in the summer of 1880. Anna moved up the canyon and helped at the school 3 days a week. Levi finally got his own roof, a small house he built himself on the far side of the meadow. Garrett did not marry. He did not want to. He took over the trapping ground from Silas in the second winter and ran it for the next 30 years. He never spoke of the prison again. He occasionally rode south in the fall and stayed 2 weeks with friends he did not name. Verity learned not to ask. She learned instead to leave the second loaf of bread for him on the windowsill on the mornings he came back, because she knew he would not say where he had been, and she did not need him to. The Apache camp on the eastern rim of the canyon did not disperse. In the spring of the first year, with the colonel removed and the land claim against them dropped, the band petitioned for and received formal recognition of their winter grounds. The petition was filed by a federal marshal who carried in his coat pocket a piece of evidence so complete it had to be respected. Delche lived another 7 winters. Nasha lived 20 more years after that December morning. She came to the school every spring on the first warm Saturday and helped Verity weed the kitchen garden. They never spoke much during the weeding. They did not have to. They had said the important things in a lodge with a small fire one morning in December, and the rest was a long, hushed conversation that lasted the rest of their lives. Toga became the camp's chief in the years after Delche's passing. He visited the cabin twice a year. He brought a wife and, in time, 3 children. The eldest of his children was a daughter named for the silver comb in a language that Verity learned slowly across 2 decades. The girl came to the school. She learned to read in 3 scripts. When she was 16, she carried a message all the way to Denver for her uncle. By marriage, the federal marshal Jeremiah Cole, who had retired by then, but who took the message gravely from her hand and replied at length. The Beaumont children and the Apache children grew up together in that canyon. They went out into the country later, as adults who knew in their bones that the bottom of one trunk could change the shape of a winter, and that the most important thing a person could carry was sometimes the smallest thing in the trunk. Verity and Silas had 3 children of their own, 2 daughters and a son. The eldest daughter was named Edith after Edmund. The son was named after a brother of Silas's who had died young, whom no one in this story knew, but whom Silas had loved. The youngest daughter was named Mary for no reason except that Verity liked the name, and her husband had no reason to argue with her. All 3 were taught to read in print and in raised dots before they were 6. All 3 could ride before they were 8. All three knew by the time they were 10 the story of the silver comb. They did not know, until they were much older, exactly what their grandfather had done in the winter of '63. But they knew that he had done it. And they knew that their mother had carried his work the last 1,200 miles of its journey. And they knew that the cabin they lived in had not always had a wife in it, that there had been a time when it was a place. A man went to die, and that the reason it was instead a place a family lived was because on a Tuesday afternoon in November of 1878, a young woman from Philadelphia had stepped off a coach in Silver Creek with one trunk. Inside the trunk, 3 dresses, 2 pairs of stockings, a Bible, a small leather case of books that could be read with the fingers, and at the very bottom a folded oilcloth packet containing a letter from a dead man with instructions for the living. Edmund Whitfield never saw his daughter become a wife. He never saw her teach a blind Apache child to read with the raised dot system. He never saw her stand on the porch of a cabin in the Colorado Rockies at the age of 50 and watch her grandchildren tumble out into the snow with their grandfather, 2 steps behind them. But Verity believed all her life that her father knew anyway. She believed it the first morning she woke beside Silas Beaumont in the back room of the cabin and listened to the wind moving down the eastern slope of the Rocky Mountains. She believed it the night the school burned in the autumn of 1892, and the entire town of Silver Creek, settler and Apache alike, came up the canyon to help rebuild it. She believed it the evening Silas Beaumont died in his sleep in the cabin at the age of 79 with her hand in his and the silver comb on the table by the bed and the wind moving down the eastern slope. The way it had moved the first morning, she had stood at the window of the back room and watched the world disappear. She lived 11 more years after he died. She kept the school open, all 11 of them. She wrote to Marshall Cole once a year until the year he died. The marshal wrote back. The letters were brief. They were enough. She kept the lawyer's letter and the 3rd page of her father's words in a leather portfolio under her bed. She did not need to read them again. She knew the words by heart. Tell him I have not forgotten the winter of '63. Tell him the silver comb came home. And on the last Tuesday of her life in the spring of 1926, Verity Whitfield Beaumont sat on the porch of the cabin in the late afternoon sun with the silver comb in her hair, an old-fashioned thing, now a thing her grandchildren teased her about, and watched the wind move along the eastern rim of the canyon, the way it had moved every day she had lived there, and she thought, Father, it came home. It all came home, and it stayed.